Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rosie and Bill Show. Our guest this week has one of the most recognizable voices in the music industry. He sang and toured with the one and only Elvis Presley until 1972, when he received a phone call that would change his life forever. Please welcome to the Rosie and Bill Show a man who went from Elvis to Elvira, the pride of Camden, New Jersey, Richard Sterban. Hi, Richard. Welcome to the show.
Well, hello there, and it's certainly my pleasure to be on your show, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to talking to all of your listeners and your viewers out there.
Well, thanks, Richard. We know they're looking forward to it as well. And I thought we would start off by taking a little trip north of where you are now to that place that Rosie just mentioned in the intro, Camden, New Jersey,
Okay.
which you and I have in common. We were both born there. I went across the bridge, you headed south. And but one thing that fascinated me in looking back at your bio was that at one time you were a soprano. Now, you were 6 years old, singing in Sunday school at church at the time. So, in all fairness, I have to add that. But I'm curious, what was it that got you interested originally in music, and what was it like growing up in Camden?
I always felt as a young boy I was musically inclined, and I was asked to sing in Sunday school in church, and I was only about 6 years old. And at the time, believe it or not, I was a boy's soprano. I know that's hard to believe, but I had a very high voice, and I don't remember the song that I sang, but I do remember that experience. I can picture that in my mind, me in front of the congregation singing. And even though I was just 6 years old, I really felt that this is what I was meant to do with my life. I felt like I was meant to be in front of people singing. Now, I got sidetracked a few times, and being from, all about this, being from Camden yourself, I grew up being a Phillies fan, and I dreamed about playing for the Phillies someday, but I knew that was never going to happen. So I followed my dream of being a singer, and actually I had a high voice until I got into junior high school, believe it or not. And in seventh grade, I was still singing tenor in what we called the Glee Club. And over the summer, between seventh grade and eighth grade, my voice changed. I think I probably scared my mother when I talked to her a little bit. But anyway, the choir teacher could not believe the difference when I went back for my eighth grade year. She put me in the second bass section, and obviously I've been there ever since.
Wow, that's when the magic happened, huh?
Well, I guess so.
That's incredible. So, did you play baseball though all through high school and everything?
I played baseball when I was in school, in junior high school. I was a catcher. I could never hit. So I think the baseball coach was kind to me and let me coach first base. But I knew I did not have the talents to be a ball player, but I became a huge fan. And I am a big fan. You can tell by the way I'm dressed. I'm a huge fan to this very day. And Bill was asking me about my hat, the Nashville Sounds. That is the team we have here in Nashville. And for 30 years, I was a part owner of that team. That's how much I love baseball. So it's always been a big part of my life. But I felt like singing and music came first. And I'm glad I made that decision, certainly.
Yeah, that was definitely the right decision. Before I ask my next question, who was your favorite Philly?
Back then, I probably would have to say Richie Ashburn. Now, I'm going way back. The Whiz Kids in 1950, and maybe Robin Roberts. All the kids that I grew up with either wanted to be Richie Ashburn or Robin Roberts. And a lot of reviewers probably have never heard of those names. But that was back in 1950, the Whiz Kids, the great Philadelphia team.
And Richard, I'm holding up. This is a dual bobblehead of Harry Callis and Richie Ashburn.
How about that? That's pretty amazing. It really is. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate each and every one of you. And we also appreciate our first and longest running sponsor of the show, Tom and his team of insurance professionals at the Malin Agency. If world-class customer service and doing business with someone you can trust is important to you, give Tom and his team a call today for all your insurance needs.
So, Richard, how did your opportunity to sing with Elvis Presley come about? And what are some of your favorite memories from that time?
Well, I helped organize my own group, a group called the Key. I went to college in Trenton, New Jersey. And while I was there, I wanted to sing. And I met three guys from right across the river in Bristol, Pennsylvania.
Mm.
We decided to start a group. And since three of the guys were from the Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, we decided to call our group the Keystone Quartet. And we sang, in churches and revival meetings and gospel concerts up in that part of the country. And we sang with JD and the Stamps on a few occasions. And they heard me sing. And when JD Sumner decided he wanted to retire from the road, he wanted to hire a younger bass singer to take his place, he called me. And so it involved me having to move to Nashville. So I moved to Nashville. And, I was only there for a few months when JD Sumner got a phone call from Elvis. And Elvis and JD were very good friends. And Elvis was looking to hire a new backup group because his old group had a conflict, could not make the next tour. So we hired JD and the Stamps. And all of a sudden, I found myself a young guy in my 20s singing on stage with the biggest star in the world, Elvis. And, I got to know Elvis just a little bit. And I have some great memories of the times I spent with Elvis. And a lot of people ask me, tell me one of your favorite experiences with Elvis. And the experience I always go to is the very first time that I ever met Elvis. It's something I will never, ever forget. When I was with the Stamps Quartet and we found out we were going to be singing with Elvis, it involved us having to rehearse. And the tour was going to start in Minneapolis. So we went to Minneapolis. We reported to the ballroom where the rehearsal was supposed to be scheduled, but there was no Elvis. We got there, the TCB band, they were all there. The Sweet Inspirations, they were all there. The ladies that sang back up to Elvis, Kathy Westmoreland, the soprano singer that sang with him, they were all there. We kind of hung out, got to know them a little bit. And they said, Elvis always liked to be fashionably late, but this is just a little unusual here today. But after a while, we heard commotion coming down the hall. The door of the rehearsal hall opened, and in walked Elvis. And I think my jaw dropped. I went, wow. At that instant, I was always an Elvis fan, but at that instant, I realized why he was the biggest star in the world. When he walked into the room, you could almost feel him in the room. He has such charisma, such magnetism. And he came over, he hugged us all by our necks, he welcomed us into his organization. So I have to admit, the first time I ever met Elvis was an experience I will never, ever forget.
Wow, that's incredible. And before Bill asks his next question, because I don't want to monopolize, but I do have to ask this. When you were on stage with Elvis, what was that experience like to be part of the electricity of that? And how does it compare when you're on stage with the Oaks?
Well, that's a great question. And, it was a great experience. Being on stage with Elvis, it was like electricity in the arena, and flash bulbs would go off, and it was pretty amazing. And I was just kind of standing in the dark singing background harmonies. Nobody really knew who I was or cared who I was, but I could feel the excitement, because Elvis was a special person. But that whole experience with Elvis, I kind of looked at it as a learning experience. I think it helped prepare me for what was to come later on in my life with the Oak Ridge Boys. I remember a few years later with the Oak Ridge Boys going back to the very same arenas that we played with Elvis, just totally packed out, just as packed out for the Oak Ridge Boys, not an empty seat anywhere. So I think it was a learning experience. I watched Elvis closely. I learned how to be a professional from him. And once again, it was an amazing experience I will never, ever forget.
Wow. And it definitely seems like, Richard, from what you said, it prepared you for a phone call that you got back in 1972 from William Lee Golden. So I'm wondering, what can you share with us about that phone call and what went into that decision-making process? Because to make that move from the biggest star on the planet at that time to the Oak Ridge Boys, that's, to me, looking back, that had to be a pretty bold move on your part, but one I'm pretty sure you're glad you made.
Well, you're absolutely correct about that. First, it was a phone call followed by a decision that changed my life. There's no doubt about it. William Lee Golden, he's the gentleman in our group, as everyone knows, with the long beard. Back then when he called me, he did not have that long beard. He was Mr. GQ. But he called me at the time and he said the bass singer was leaving and the Oak Ridge Boys wanted to know if I would be interested in taking the job. And here I was apparently on top of the world singing with the biggest star in the world, but I had to make a decision. And I have to admit, at the same time, I was a big fan of the Oak Ridge Boys. I loved the music that they were making. I actually even collected their album. Back in those days, we had albums, these big things with a little hole in the middle. I used to collect their records. And so I was a fan. And I felt like the Oak Ridge Boys had a great deal of potential, and I wanted to be a part of the group. So, back then I made a decision in 1972 to leave Elvis and to join the Oak Ridge Boys. And, I followed my heart, and people question that decision. How could you do that? But I really believed that I was doing the right thing. And now, 52 years later, when I look back on that decision, and look back on the great career that I've been able to experience together with my partners, the Oak Ridge Boys, I really think I made the correct decision back then. Back then this is kind of an interesting side to that decision. Back then, when I was standing in the dark singing with Elvis, I had no idea that someday I would be in the same Hall of Fame with him. But now I am in the Country Music Hall of Fame. All four Oak Ridge Boys are in the Country Music Hall of Fame. And if you go into the rotunda here in Nashville, into the Country Music Hall of Fame, you'll see the four faces of the Oak Ridge Boys on the wall in bronze. Then you look down the wall a little ways, you'll see Elvis in bronze. And not just Elvis, you'll see Johnny Cash. You'll see Kenny Rogers, you'll see Dolly Parton. The list goes on and on and on. So I never dreamed that would happen to me back. But I think that further indicates that I made a pretty good decision back then.
Yeah, and Richard, I can't help but wonder if there are any other people from Camden, New Jersey in the Country Music Hall of Fame.
That is a great question. I know there's some other people, like Eddie Rabbitt comes to my mind. He's a guy from New Jersey
Yeah.
that made a name for himself in country music. But I don't think Eddie is in the Country Music Hall of Fame. So I don't know that there is someone to try
Yeah.
to answer your question, really.
Well, you're right. It really is a testament to being willing to get out of a comfort zone because, like you said, a lot of your friends said, "What are you thinking?" But you knew somewhere that you also had your own light to shine.
Well, you're
And
right about that. Singing with Elvis was very exciting. Don't get me wrong. When it first happened to me, I couldn't believe it was actually happening. And it was very exciting. But at the same time, I was strictly a backup singer. I was standing in the dark. I mentioned that earlier, oohs and ahs and singing background harmonies. And it was exciting, but my aspirations were beyond being a backup singer. And then when this opportunity came for the Oak Ridge Boys, I seized on it. I believed it was the right thing to do. I followed my heart, and I think it paid off in a pretty good way.
well, I'm sure that Elvis had a lot of respect for you. I'm sure he, before his passing, got to see the impact also of the Oak Ridge Boys. And there was another famous country singer that you mentioned already, Johnny Cash, who was also a fan of the Oak Ridge Boys back in the 70s. What was that experience like for you to have Johnny Cash be a fan of yours?
It was very special. I can honestly say there probably would not be an Oak Ridge Boys today if it was not for Johnny Cash and his wonderful wife, June Carter. They kind of took us under their wing, back when we were a young, struggling act and we had no money, we didn't know what to do. Johnny Cash recognized that there was something special about the Oak Ridge Boys. And so he put us on his show. And we were on his show and we would sing, he'd give us like 10 minutes maybe to sing three songs to open his show. But it was a great experience. And kind of put us in front of an audience that had never seen us before. But we were still struggling back in those days. And I remember, and this is a great story, I remember playing in Las Vegas with Johnny Cash. We had no other dates booked. We did not know how we were going to continue after this engagement in Las Vegas with Johnny Cash. And our heads were kind of hanging. We were wondering what we were going to do. Johnny Cash sensed that. So one day, it was a week-long engagement. One day during the middle of that week, he called us all in the afternoon. He said, fellas, come to my room. I want to talk to you guys. And he said, so we went to the room. We couldn't figure out what was going on. We were hoping he wasn't going to fire us. But he said, fellas, there's something special about you guys. He says, I can tell your heads are hanging a little bit. You're wondering about your future. He said, but I want to encourage you to don't give up. He said, I think you're sensing maybe you might have to give up. He says, I'm going to tell you, please do not give up. He says, I will help you as much as I can. And he always paid us more money, really, than he said he would pay us, because he knew we were hurting financially. But his words of encouragement were the thing. That was the thing that really helped us. That day, he said, don't give up. He said, I'll help you, but it's up to you. You are going to have to find a way to stay together. And if you do, he says, you have my word. I promise you, good things are going to start happening to you. You guys are going to make it. So find a way, and it's going to happen. And I remember leaving that meeting with Johnny Cash. Instead of our heads hanging, we all went, wow, if Johnny Cash thinks we are going to make it, we are going to make it. And to make it along, and obviously we did find a way. And and not too long after that, we came in contact with a gentleman named Jim Halsey, who is still our manager today. He signed us to our first record contract with ABC Dot Records, which later became MCA Records. He acquired the services of a gentleman named Ron Chancey to be our producer, and we started having hit records. And in 1977, we had our first hit called Y'all Come Back Saloon, and we followed it up for the next 15 years or so. Pretty much everything we released went to the top of the country music charts. But Johnny Cash provided that inspiration for us. And I remember not too long after that meeting, we won our first CMA award for Vocal Group of the Year. Johnny Cash was hosting the show. And when they announced that we had won, we ran up on the stage, and instead of going to the podium on the left-hand side to accept our award, we ran over to the right-hand side where Johnny Cash was standing, and we all hugged his neck. And I remember in that big booming voice of his, he said, see, fellas, I told you so. So Johnny Cash is a special person. And not just the Oak Ridge Boys, so many young artists, Larry Gatlin and the Gatlin brothers, Marty Stewart, a lot of our artists can tell you Johnny Cash helped them along the way. And he certainly helped the Oak Ridge Boys.
What a great man.
Richard, as you're saying that, I'm thinking even later in his life, we had the pleasure a couple years back of speaking with Ira Dean. And Johnny played a big role in Ira's development and his career too, as a songwriter and as a performer. So, but that I can't even imagine that feeling of, especially when you got that award and just running up on the stage and doing that and having, it's one thing for someone to believe in you, but when that someone is Johnny Cash, man, that I can see where that can take your head from hanging low to being in the clouds.
Oh, there's no doubt. And I talked earlier in the interview about how special Elvis was. Only other person I've ever met in my life that would come to that same level has to be Johnny Cash. When he walked into the room, he took the place over, if you know what I'm saying. And I remember the first time we ever performed with him, we had to wait on the side of the stage because we had to do some background harmonies during his show. And I remember that day, the stage went dark. He was the man in black. He was dressed all in black. He walked out to the microphone, and in his big booming voice, he said, hi, I'm Johnny Cash. And boom, the lights came on, the music started playing, and I got goosebumps. I realized then why he was so special, because he was a special man, to say the least.
Wow. Now, I wanted to follow up, if I could, Richard, with another special night. And I'd love to get your perspective on it because William Lee talked about it. And again, I wanted to see what it was like for you. The first night you guys performed Elvira. From what we understand, you sang it once and it went over so well that you sang it again. And then a third time in the encore in the same show. So did you guys know right then and there, oh, we might be on to something here?
When we first recorded Elvira, first of all, I mentioned earlier in the interview that Ron Chansey was our producer. He produced most of the #1 records on the Oak Ridge Boys. And I remember being in his office, listening to songs, getting ready to record our next album. He said, fellas, I have something I want to play for you guys. This may be the song we're looking for. And he played Dallas Frazier's version. Dallas Frazier wrote the song. He played Dallas Frazier's version of Elvira. It was the first time I had ever heard it. Now, some of the other guys had heard it before, but it was the first time I ever heard it. But I heard this song and I went, wow, this could be something special. Sure enough, a few days later, we were in the studio recording Elvira, and you could tell when we were recording it, it was going to be a special song. The musicians were really into it. Everybody was smiling. We got the song in just 2 or 3 takes. So after the recording session, we felt, we had something special in our hands. And, a lot of also in that recording session, Johnny, Ron Chansey is what I'm trying to say. It was his idea for me to take the giddy up, oom papa, mau mau part. So what I did, I just adapted it to my way of doing things. And I think it turned out okay. But after that recording session, we felt like we did have a pretty good song in our hands. But I don't think we realized the extent of it until that very first time that you were talking about when we recorded it in person. We were in Spokane, Washington, of all places. We were playing at the Opera House, and we decided just in the middle of the show, we didn't say anything, did not even introduce the song. We just did the song right in the middle of the show. And while we were doing it, first time these people have ever heard it, they started standing up. They were screaming, cheering, yelling. And then after the song, the applause went on and on. It would not quit. So we had to encore the song. And then right in the middle of the show, we encored it several times, at least 3 or 4 times. And then at the end of the show, we did it again, and we had to encore it at the end of the show. Now, the rest of that West Coast trip that we were on, that we got very similar reactions to that song. And so we called our record label up and said, we have something special on our hands. We've got to get this song out. And sure enough, back in 1981, it only became the top country song of the year. It was the #1. It was #1 on the pop charts as well for several weeks, and it was only one of 2 platinum single records that year. The only other song was Kool and the Gang, Celebration. So we felt like we were in real high cotton that year when Elvira hit. It was something special. It changed our lives. And to this very day, over 40 years later, it's still the song that everybody wants to hear. And if anyone's listening, if we ever come your way on this farewell tour that we're on, you can count on the fact we're going to do Elvira, and you can count on the fact you're going to hear me do Giddy Up, Oom Papa, Mau Mau.
Wow. Does that low part get any harder over the years?
Well, when you get older, it's hard to do the things you used to do when we were younger. I'll be the first one to admit that, but it's still a lot of fun. And I think for me, the most fun that I get singing Elvira is every time I get to the Papa Mau Mau part. I love looking out into the audience, and I love looking at all the men trying to sing that part along with me. I always have a lot of fun with that because it is a special line, and it's probably the most well-known bass line in the music business. And I'm kind of proud I was able to sing on it.
Wow, that's for sure, Richard, without a doubt. Now, you just mentioned a couple minutes ago about the tour, and I've got 2 questions on the current farewell tour.
Okay?
Number one, with regard to Ben James, he had some huge shoes to fill. So I'm wondering what it's been like playing with him first. And second, I heard recently that this tour is going so well that people may not be done with seeing the Oak Ridge Boys. It may be going into next year.
Well, you're asking me a question that has a couple of parts to it. So I'll try to tackle it. First of all, Ben James. He is so good. He's only 28 years old. That's his heart. Compared to us, that's unbelievable. But he's brought so much talent and so much youth and so much energy to our group. And it's very, very exciting. And he is not trying to be Joe,
Mhm.
because there's no way he can be Joe. But we're not asking him to be Joe, but he's just being himself. And one of the most gratifying things is every night when we sing to see that our fans have accepted him. They're taking to him, like he's a part of the Oak Ridge Boys. And in some ways, he was handpicked by Joe to take his place. A couple of years ago, we did a concert with a group called Deli and Vincent. I
Mhm.
don't know if you ever heard of them. They're
Yeah.
kind of bluegrass slash gospel group. Well, Ben James was singing with them. And when we got to Elvira on our show, they came out on stage and they joined us and sang Elvira together with us. And Joe, in his usual way, sang the first verse. And then when we got to the second verse, Ben James was standing right next to him because Deli and Vincent had come out there to join us. He handed the mic to Ben, and Ben sang the second verse. And when we heard him sing, we went, wow, this kid can really sing. And he and Joe kind of hit it off. And we found out that he was a big fan of Joe's. He knew everything Joe had ever done. And when Joe finally got to the place where he felt like he had to retire from the road, he recommended that we hire Ben. And so Joe kind of handpicked Ben. So he's doing a fantastic job. He certainly is. And we're honored to have him with us. Now to answer your second part of your question, yes, we are on our farewell tour. And it's very exciting. And we originally thought that maybe the farewell tour would last a year. And what we wanted to do, and we're still doing it, we've been very fortunate. We've been very blessed, if I could put it that way, to have a great, great career. 50 plus years of so much success. Some for presidents of the United States. I could go on and talk about the great things. But we felt like we wanted to say thank you to the people that allowed us to have such a great career. So we wanted to go to as many places as possible to say thank you to our fans for allowing us to have a great career. And not just our fans, but people in radio that have played our records over the years, people in radio that have promoted our group, people like you fine folks who are promoting the Oak Ridge Boys, and people in the press that have written so many great things about us over the years. We wanted to go to as many places as possible and say thank you. And we're well into this year, and we are not close to going to as many places as we want to go to. So we're now booking dates for next year, and we'll see how that goes. So we are not retired yet. We've always depended on divine guidance, and we always ask the good Lord above to lead us. And we feel like He will tell us when it's time to retire for good. He has not said that yet. So we are going to be around for a while. And so if you're listening to my voice, and you see that we're coming, come and see us because we're celebrating a great career that we've been able to have. Come and celebrate together with us.
Yeah, that really is. Now, Richard, I have to say that I appreciate what you just shared about that story about Ben and filling those big shoes of Joe, and what a class move by Joe. And for the folks watching, I know many of our viewers know that Joe was from Philadelphia. You're from Camden, New Jersey, so you've got half the Oak Ridge Boys was from the Northeast originally. And I'm just so glad to hear that story that you shared with us. And one other thing that I was curious about too is, do you ever get back to New Jersey or the Jersey Shore area at all?
Yes, the answer to your question is absolutely yes. Back in July, we sang in one of my favorite places on earth. We sang right on the boardwalk in Ocean City, New Jersey. And then the very two nights later, we sang at the Keswick Theater,
Oh,
right there
yeah.
in Philadelphia. So we've been back to the area, and I go back there every now and then. There's something about New Jersey. If nothing else, I needed to go back there and eat the food. My mother was born in Italy, and there's more Italians in New Jersey than I think there are in Italy. So I have to go back there every now and for I fix and get some good Italian food. And you will also, being from Philadelphia, you'll get a kick out of this. Before Joe and I ever became members of the Oak Ridge Boys, I sang in a group part-time on the weekends, and I had to work on the week. And I worked in a store in Philadelphia called Gimbel Brothers, which is no longer there, but I used to sell men's clothing. And I'll never forget, Joe used to come in and occasionally buy a shirt from me. But we talked about singing. We talked about singing together someday. But we had no idea back in those days that someday we would have a 50-plus year career as members of the Oak Ridge Boys. So you never know how things will work out in your life.
Wait, so who got in the group first, you or him?
Well, I did. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that J.D. Sumner called me up, and I had to move to Nashville. And then once I joined the Oak Ridge Boys, and then the tenor singer that we had left, then we decided we wanted to hire Joe. So Joe came after me. So
That's incredible. That's just amazing. Well, before we wrap things up, Richard, I have a question for you because you mentioned that you sang for presidents and you've had just such a decorated career with the Oak Ridge Boys. But what are you most proud of in your life, whether it's music or personal?
well, I think as the Oak Ridge Boys, we've always wanted to be a group that made an impact on the music business. And I think we have done just that. But more importantly than that, in this day of, especially in this day of social media, we get instant feedback from our fans and we really, more than making an impact on the music business, we want to be remembered as a group that helped people with our music. And from all the responses we've gotten years ago with the snail mail, as they used to call it, and now with the social media, we have found that over the years, our music has helped people that are going through difficult times in their lives. When we walk on stage, we never know what people are going through out there. Could be having marital problems. They could be having health issues. They could be having financial issues. You never know what it is. But if for a while our music can take your mind away from that, and put you in a zone that makes you smile, I think you help people. And I think we've been able to do that as the Oak Ridge Boys. We've always tried to choose material that has positive lyrics, that helps people going through difficult times in their lives. And that is the most gratifying thing, to hear that we have actually helped people with our music. And I hope that continues as long as we continue singing as the Oak Ridge Boys.
Well, Richard, I just want to say one thing before Rosie closes us out. And you just made me think of it as you were saying that, because I think of your music making people smile and making people feel good. And we talked about Elvira, but I will tell you, folks, Bobby Sue, if you listen to that song and that doesn't make you move and make you smile, you need to have a health checkup or something. I love the song, always have. And American Made, that makes me feel proud to be American. I love that song. So again, I just wanted to give a couple examples of what you were talking about. And more importantly, I want to thank you on behalf of Rosie and I and all of your fans here back in New Jersey and the Philadelphia area where our show is based, for all the joy, all the music, and all the gifts you've brought us over the years and continue to do. Richard, we thank you.
Well, thank you. And before I go, baseball playoffs are almost here, and the World Series is almost here. So I'm going to finish on one note. One note. Go Phillies! Yes.
Yay! Go Phils! We pray they can make it happen this year.
I hope this is their year. It seems like this is their year, and I hope that's the case.
Well, we do too, Richard. And thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and chat with us. Folks, go see the Oak Ridge Boys on their farewell tour. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, folks, for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much.
This week's episode has been brought to you by Doherty & Company Insurance Services for all your business and personal insurance needs. our friends at Tennis Addiction in Exton, PA, and the Malin Agency, where exceeding expectations is how they do business.